Hi YouTube, Darth here. This is Yes or No, a weapon review series where I give a clear and concise answer as to what weapons you should be using in Battlefield. Today's weapon is the P90 personal defense weapon, which is one of the 3 weapons rewarded by completing the Battlefield 4 single-player campaign. The P90 has some distinct characteristics that make it a hip-fire machine and can cause some havoc in bursts. But should you be using the P90? Yes or no? No. Although it's close to being a recommendation, there are several things that hold back the P90, and it has something to do with the way Battlefield 4 processes rate of fire. Let's talk about the gun's above-ground characteristics that make it an attractive weapon. The P90 has a rate of fire of 900 rounds per minute, making it relatively forgiving of missed shots. The rate of fire also helps to buoy its lackluster damage model so that the P90 is inside of the average for damage of PDWs. Even if you don't land every shot, the P90 can give a lot of punishment in a short time given the right ranges. The P90 has possibly one of the best hipfire pairings in the game. It's in the PDW class, which already affords it some benefit, and it's a bullpup. The on-the-move and standing hipfire advantages certainly make the P90 look attractive to CQB players. When paired with a laser sight, it is extremely unlikely that you miss a lot of hipfire shots closer than 15 meters. With 50 rounds per magazine, the P90 is tied with the CBJ-MS for the largest amount of ammo in a PDW magazine. Only the light machine guns carry more in Battlefield 4. The benefit is that you can go long periods between reloads and potentially hold off a larger number of enemies. At 0.3 degrees left and 0.3 degrees right per shot, the P90 has a balanced recoil that makes it easier to use. In general, the recoil pattern is going to go up like a V. This makes it easier to predict and likely a good deal more attractive for console players, as counteracting the horizontal recoil is not required. So there are a lot of advantages to running the P90 if you're so inclined. Tons of ammo, forgiving recoil, and good at hipfire. The P90 is a relatively decent weapon if you're new to the game and don't mind the shortcomings of the weapon, which I shall talk about now. At 2.9 seconds for the short reload and 3.55 seconds for the long, the P90 has some long reload times. It's the second worst in the PDW category behind the Groza. Especially for a close quarters weapon, I find that long reloads are pretty bad due to the nature of CQB. Because you're in the enemy's face, suddenly dropping a long reload time can often mean your next target is rounding the corner and you're out of luck. At just 21 max damage per shot, for body shots you start at 5 bullets to kill and it drops off to 6 bullets to kill by just 16 meters. I often remarked that I was tickling my enemies whenever I turned the P90 on them. And I imagine they were probably pretty tickled that the outcome was usually they win at any range beyond my arm's reach. With a first shot recoil multiplier of 2x, the P90 crosses over into the territory of having a high first shot recoil multiplier. This means that its upwards recoil is doubled every time you first start shooting, specifically after that first bullet. This makes its aim potential even more bothersome and pretty much means that shots beyond close quarters are a coin flip or worse. On paper, the P90 seemed like it was going to be a pretty good weapon. I gave the MP7 a yes vote some time ago, and the P90 is not far off that in characteristics. In fact, it's better at hipfire. So I really had to do some research to figure out why I felt like I was cursed anytime I was using the P90. PDWs are somewhat limiting, but this one felt especially out of place versus its on-paper stats. Let's check out some of the numbers behind this weapon for some insight. Against the spread of the MP7, the JS2, and the SG553, the P90 doesn't look too bad. Using aimed fire, the MP7 has a very small advantage out to 15 or so meters. This wasn't quite as big a difference as I had hoped because my experience with the two guns was significantly wider than this millisecond spread implied, so I looked a bit deeper. Next, I took a look at the hipfire performance of the weapons versus their time to kill. Here, the MP7 wins, but it's not by as wide of a margin as I would have expected. Now, the MP7 does have some advantages, like coming with a folding grip, but that's not a vast enough difference to explain why I didn't like the P90 nearly as much. This was weird to me, so I had to take into account something I don't usually do on this series. A technicality of the Frostbite engine that is a bit strange and usually doesn't matter enough to make a difference. What it comes down to is how Battlefield 4 handles rate of fire in the individual frames of the game. This research was gathered by Synthic user 3verts North. Weapons that are 800 to 900 rounds per minute are essentially the same in the first 5 bullets. They release 5 bullets in 9 frames. This matters because most weapons are 5 bullets to kill in close to mid-range. The MP7 at 950 rounds per minute will release those first 5 bullets in 8 frames, giving it a distinct advantage in time to kill in close quarters versus the other weapons. I've tried to illustrate this as best as possible using a modified rate of fire to compensate for this fact. What this comes down to is that rate of fire on weapons matters a little bit less than you might have thought. Generally, it's a good measure of a weapon's performance, but with the P90 it really becomes necessary to show the distinction between why this weapon is lackluster and the MP7 really sings. Also keep in mind that PDWs share an envelope with shotguns, so you need to have reasons to not just run the insta-kill weapon. Being one of the campaign weapons, the P90 requires you to play through the entire campaign and make a very particular choice at the end. You have to choose to give the C4 to Hannah when the campaign demands you make a choice at the end of the final single-player level. It's not a particularly difficult mission, and the last half is mostly cinematic. You can replay the mission and simply make a different choice to unlock the different weapons. Honestly, all three of the weapons unlocked from the campaign are relatively lackluster outside of a console. So if you've not gathered them by now, I do not recommend doing this unless you're a completionist. The recoil of the P90 is another one that's relatively forgiving. It's just 0.32 degrees up, 0.3 left, and 0.3 right with a first shot recoil multiplier of 2.0. This means that the weapon is going to go up and form a roughly V-like shape. The aimed fire of this weapon is pretty atrocious, so I would much more recommend using hip fire at all times. To counter the recoil, you'll merely need to pull straight down. I don't recommend trying to hose your targets even with hip fire. As you can see, the spread per shot can make this weapon relatively unwieldy in short order. The minimum hip fire spread is 0.75 degrees on the first shot, and it gets worse pretty fast with the 900 rounds per minute rate of fire. Instead, try to get in close and use bursting with your hip fire. You'll want to aim for bursts of about 5 rounds, as out to 15 meters that will get the job done pretty quick. Microbursting is probably out, as the first shot recoil multiplier is in the territory where I wouldn't recommend it. And unlike the MPX, you can't choose to pair the P90 with an angled grip. The P90 is only good in close quarters, and we're talking really close, closer than 16 meters as the game would have it. That means you're going to need to find ways to get creative on bigger maps, play smaller maps, or simply stick to close quarters areas on big maps. I tend to run smoke grenades with short-range weapons, as this lets me screen some movement when I otherwise have no hope. And really, the P90 is pathetic even at mid-range, so you're not scaring anybody. As PDWs are engineer exclusive in Battlefield 4, I recommend running with the SMAW. This will let you reach out and hit long-range targets with some rocket-powered justice. You can also bring along a long-range performance sidearm like the Magnum, but I really don't find myself using that too terribly much against long-range targets. Ultimately, where the P90 is going to suit you best is going to be in the close quarters game. Be sure you're always hip-firing the weapon and pushing your advantage. If you're not full on health, you'll probably want to hang back for a bit of a regen. Because the damage output of the P90 is not that great, you're going to be risking it if you expect to kill your target with a health disadvantage. If they pull on you the same time you do them, you're going to lose, as you do not have a time to kill advantage even with your hip fire advantage. So pick your battles appropriately. Being a PDW, the P90 has a distinct disadvantage in that you don't get to choose a whole lot of options for the gun. It's a bullpup, so it has some advantage built in for the on-the-move and hip-fire abilities, and that's really where you should be thinking about tuning it up a little bit. Doing the typical cross-reference with BF4Stats.com and Battlelog, I found that most top players tend to do a few things. For the most part, they ran with the RDS sights, no accessory, and a heavy barrel. That's a relatively good setup, and that's a decent starting spot. But what did I end up running for the P90? For my optic, I mostly used the Coyote red dot sight. I honestly don't think you should be using your sight too much, and sometimes considered throwing something awful on it just to discourage using the sight. But the Coyote is built for close quarters combat, and I think it's just a little bit less distracting than the other options. You're certainly free to pick whatever you want here, but just know that higher magnification sights are going to be painful because of the high first shot recoil on the P90. For the accessory, I ended up using the laser sight. Now this gives the weapon a bit better of a hipfire bonus, but I think if you're paranoid, you might want to ditch the laser sight. Lasers have the problem in Battlefield 4 of being giveaways, and not just in line of sight either. The dot they project goes through everything, so running around can sometimes give you away before you ever draw on an opponent. If you feel like you're paranoid, you could certainly get rid of the laser and be fine enough in close quarters. The laser isn't going to win you too many more encounters than it's going to prematurely give away. At least on the P90. Finally, for my barrel, I mostly ran with the suppressor. It'll slow the performance of the P90 down somewhat, taking the actually decent velocity from 460 meters per second to just 320. But it gives you the distinct advantage of having longer runs before you get stopped. Remember how I said earlier that the P90 has bad damage and doesn't win if you're at a health disadvantage? Well, the easiest way to get into that situation is to find yourself in a group of enemies with an unsilenced weapon. Throw a silencer on it and you can get a kill streak going a lot more easily without having to worry about being at a constant disadvantage from enemies that are hunting you. So the P90 is a weapon that is on the verge of greatness. I think on the consoles it probably would be a yes vote thanks to its balanced recoil and relative forgiveness of missed shots. But due to some technicalities and a general lack of performance in Battlefield 4's golden ranges of 15 to 35 meters, I find it hard for the P90 to carve itself a good spot. Short of a large ammo capacity, it doesn't really outperform its peers in the PDW category and certainly struggles against shotguns. Given all of this, it's a no, but just barely. Since I talked it up a bunch in this episode, if you're looking for an alternative, I still do recommend the MP7. It's almost as good at hipfire and has a distinct time to kill advantage over the P90. The reload time is faster as well at just 2.65 seconds, and it carries only 10 fewer bullets per magazine than the P90. It's definitely my favorite close quarters PDW thus far. If you're looking for close quarters punching power and don't care about being quiet, you can't go wrong with the Saiga 12K. This magazine-fed shotgun is exceptionally powerful in the short game and doesn't sacrifice killing potential for its ammunition load. It'll never be as great at hipfire, but that doesn't matter much when the shotgun will often kill in a single shot. That's it for this episode of Yes or No. If there's something you think that I missed, or if you have a particularly different take on the P90, please let me know in the comments below. If you've got a weapon you'd like me to review for Battlefield, also leave a comment. If you like what you saw, be sure to force choke that like button. If you're new here, check out my channel and consider sticking around with the subscribe. And as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time, YouTube.